Thousands of people have taken to the streets across France as part of the so-called Block Everything movement. Demonstrators built barricades from rubbish bins, blocked schools and roads, and pelted police with garbage earlier this Wednesday. 80,000 police have been deployed nationwide, and so far some 300 people have been arrested. The protests are a broad expression of anger at the political class and planned budget cuts. It has no centralised leadership and was organised over social media. Well, for more on the action in Paris, we can cross live to our reporter Antonia Kerrigan. Antonia, you're at Place du Châtelet in central Paris. What's going on where you are?
Hi there, Carys. Well, this is one of the authorised protests, as opposed to one of the underground organisations from social media. But protesters have really gathered here. They've gravitated from other areas where protesters have been dispersed. Now, if I give you an idea, around 2 hours ago, there were probably only 100 people. If you look behind me, the mobilisation is absolutely vast. Now, as it's grown, we've seen different groups of protesters arriving. Some of them in protest formation, if you will, arriving triumphantly, brandishing placards and showing and brandishing flares above their heads. Many of them chanting as well. And of course, the police presence has grown as the number of protesters has increased. As you said, around 300 arrests have been made so far across France. Here it remains fairly peaceful. Riot police are present at every point of access to this square, and we've also seen Brave M, that's mounted police officers on motorcycles in pairs, in plain clothes. We've seen them circling, but we're yet to see any major interactions or any tension between police and protesters so far here at Place du Châtelet.
And Antonia, you've of course been talking to some of those demonstrators. What exactly are they saying and what are their demands?
Well, I'd like to say first and foremost, there's a huge variety of people here. Many young protesters, a lot of them students, but also much older people into their 50s and 60s, many who have even come with children. So a wide range of people represented here. Many of them, as of course one of the organisers here today in Châtelet are the trade unions. Many of them work in public sector professions, and they talk to me about public services that they consider being damaged by budget cuts. Many of them are outraged at François Bayrou's proposed budget, which was looking to cut 44 billion euros in public spending. And one thing that came through in multiple people I spoke to was that they saw Emmanuel Macron's choice to appoint a new prime minister yesterday from his own political inner circle the day before a protest such as this. They took that as a clear signal that he wasn't interested in listening to them.
All right, Antonia Kerrigan, thank you very much for that update. We're going to stay on this story now. We're joined by Éléonore Caroit, who's an MP from Macron's Renaissance Party. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.
Hi, thank you.
As we heard from our reporter on the ground, there's a lot of different demands from these protesters, but many of them are just angry at Emmanuel Macron. Their anger quite rife there in the streets. But the president doesn't plan on stepping down, does he?
No, and that would be against our constitution and against the rule of law to have him down because you have protesters on the streets. I think it is legitimate to express one's anger. It is also legitimate to want to see some change, and this is precisely what is going to happen with this new government. But I do not believe that by blocking our country and by imposing some sort of chaos without clear call for actions or without clear requests, we're going to go anywhere. And I regret that some of the political leaders today in France are instrumentalizing this movement to actually force Emmanuel Macron decision to, step down, which I don't believe he will do, or force him to do so, because this is not in the interest of our country.
Well, Macron's, of course, seen a large number of protests since he took office. Is this one any different? Will he respond in any way?
It's very difficult to say at this stage because we don't have the figures. What we see is it's a very erratic movement with people from the far right, people from the left. There's been some polls about who was going to be mobilized on the 10th of September. apparently there is a majority of young people from cities mainly. So it's very different from what we saw a few years ago with the Gilets jaunes movement. And on the other hand, there's also a majority of people that sympathize with Jean-Luc Mélenchon's theories. So you see that from a very spontaneous movement that started on social network, we're now into a very instrumentalized movement in favor of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, whose agenda is not hidden. I mean, he's tried to be president already 3 times, and he lost the national elections, and he wishes to become so, through the anger of the streets.
Right, so French unions have chosen not to throw their weight behind today's protests, but there are more demonstrations later this month. After those, do you expect any kind of response from the government?
Yes, and this is very telling. The fact that you don't have unions in this movement shows you that there's really no clear request. It is really just expressing some form of anger, and again, as I said, instrumentalizing people's legitimate fear or anger. On the other hand, what will happen or may happen later this month, it's a totally different story. You have unions that do represent workers, and you have different acteurs sociaux that will start a dialogue. And I believe this dialogue can be made in a peaceful manner with a new government that has said today, the new prime minister said that he's willing to discuss with everyone, change the methodology, and actually embrace the fact that we now have a National Assembly that it's very divided, and this is what the French people decided when they voted for us a year ago.
Right, we are going to talk a little bit more about that later, but stay with us, Éléonore Caroit. Now we're going to go to our Entre Nous segment, and we'll speak to Solange Mougin for more on what exactly are protesters' rights here in France. What constitutes one of those legal protests like the one that our reporter Antonia was in?
Well, surprisingly, for a country that is known for its manifestation or its protests, the right to protest is not actually enshrined in the French Constitution, but it is in the 1789 Declaration of Human and Citizen Rights, and from a law of October 1935, it set up the legal framework that is used today. And the basic rule is that protests need to be déclarés. Antonia was in front of a protest that was déclaré. You need to get permission to hold that protest. You state the purpose, the route, the time, the organizers. And it actually has to be done at least 3 days before the gathering. Now, a town hall or a police prefecture can deny a request for a whole number of reasons. Not enough officers for the route, a danger to public safety. The list is very, very long. And then, of course, there are les manifestations sauvages, or illegal gatherings and blockades, which we are also seeing today. And here it is important to note that you cannot be arrested for simply attending an illegal protest unless you are the organizer. As a participant, you can potentially be fined, though, for attending one. So it is best to check if it has been okayed beforehand. Now, there are other rules as well. For example, you're not allowed to cover your face at a protest. You can be asked to prove your identity. If you don't have an ID card, police cannot arrest you for this, but they can take you back to the police precinct to check your identity. And this actually goes for everyday ID checks as well. In France, you can be held at a police station for the reason of IDs or another reason for 24 hours. This can be renewed once, so the garde à vue, as it's called, or custody, police custody, can be a total of 48 hours without charges being pressed. Police officers, they can also check your bag, and they can also pat you down or frisk you before you enter an area of protest.
And Solange, one question that often comes up is, are citizens allowed to film police officers during protests?
Well, the short answer to this is yes, they can. Everyday citizens are allowed to film the police doing their jobs on the street, be it at a protest or at any other time. This is true if you witness police violence as well. A police officer is not legally allowed to take away your camera, phone, or demand that you erase images. However, there are many asterisks to this rule, or exceptions that people need to know about. In France, officers doing counter-espionage or anti-terrorist missions, they have extra rights to not be filmed, if this makes sense. But from a legal perspective, the right to privacy and dignity is generally the same for police officers as for everyday citizens. So posting images of a person in handcuffs, for example, without their consent, well, it could be seen as defamatory or against their dignity. and the same rules apply to police officers as well. And this is where you need to think about the fact that there is a difference between the act of filming. It is not the same thing as the act of publishing or posting on social media, for example. However, filming because you witness police violence or are the victim of it and keeping that footage as proof before a court, it is allowed.
Right, because journalists are often the ones that bear witness to any acts of violence in protest, be it by protesters or police.
Yeah, journalists are generally given some extra safeguards or leeway at protests because of this, the need to bear witness, to inform the public, and to push back against impunity of all sorts, including police brutality when it occurs. And here, actually, there is quite a bit of tension about this right now. The French Interior Ministry and the police prefecture were, in the eyes of many, trying to roll back this right to inform. In the guidelines on urban violence sent out this past July, they confirmed that raid or special heavily armed police, those units can be deployed if there is urban violence. And on page 4, they said that the status of journalists doesn't apply in the context of urban violence. Now, there has been a lot of pushback against this, and officials now say that this change will be removed from the guidelines. But nonetheless, it comes after previous attempts to remove the right to film officers. The last one was in 2021, and it was struck down, but it remains a hot-button issue as violence at protests has surged, according to researchers.
During the pension reform demonstrations and also particularly during the Yellow Vest protests, the number of physical injuries to demonstrators was very likely far greater than anything we've seen in recent decades, in mainland France at least, and that includes May 1968.
Depuis mai 68 inclus.
Now, new technology or weapons, as well as techniques like encircling protesters or officers not wearing their RIO, their RIO or ID numbers, so they cannot be identified. These things are common, and they have been called out by the courts and by rights groups as well. There's also violence towards officers as well. It's important to keep in mind. So amidst the tension, it's best to know your rights and those of police officers as well, and to know overall that the right to protest, to gather peacefully and to voice your opinion, well, it remains a fundamental right here in France.
A right that French people exercise very often compared to some other countries. Thank you very much for that, Solange Mougin. Well, those protests come as Macron loyalist Sébastien Lecornu took office as Prime Minister. The former Defence Minister took over from François Bayrou, who was ousted in a no-confidence vote on Monday. Lecornu will be trying to avoid the same fate. He said he would be meeting with opposition members this afternoon to try to find common ground on a number of policies. Take a listen.
We will also have to change. We will certainly have to be more creative, sometimes more technical, more committed in the way we work with our opponents. But I also say this, there will have to be changes, and not just in terms of presentation, not just in terms of method. There will also have to be changes in substance.
Well, one of his biggest challenges will be outlining plans for the 2026 budget, especially in a deeply divided parliament. Mougin has more on the uphill battle he faces.
Has the art of war taught Sébastien Lecornu the art of compromise? Concessions seem inevitable if the former defence minister wants to pass a budget without a majority. Taxing the wealthiest is a key issue for the socialists in this 2026 budget. For them, the use of Article 49.3 from France's constitution is out of the question. It allows the government to bypass Parliament and push through legislation.
Hopefully negotiations will be more mature so that budgets can pass. We've been able to compromise, for example, on wealth tax. We found ways to move forward on taxing the richest. Each time we've voted on items in various budgets, and each time they've been successively eliminated by the use of 49.3.
The centre bloc could open the door to this taxation of the wealthiest. Another issue is to find a majority on the topic of reducing public spending. This is unavoidable for the right, but also for the far right, which is setting conditions for not bringing a motion of no confidence against the government.
If, on the other hand, we have a government that listens to France's leading party, the National Rally, and which, for example, abolishes the current free healthcare system for asylum seekers and puts the state on a strict diet, then perhaps we will be more lenient with them.
To stay in control, Sébastien Lecornu could instead reconsider his predecessor's plans to eliminate some public holidays. Abandoning this measure could build consensus. But the gamble of reconciling the left and the right remains risky.
When you listen to the Republicans who want more savings, and when you listen to the Socialists, these two pillars on which the government stands, or at least on which it does not fall, they are in total opposition, in total contradiction.
The government will also have to decide very quickly on the amount of savings to be made, €44 billion or less.
Well, to talk more about this, we can come back to our guest, Éléonore Caroit, who's an MP for the Renaissance Party, representing some of the French citizens living overseas. The last two French prime ministers were in office for less than a year. What makes us think that Sébastien Lecornu won't suffer the same fate as the last two?
Well, that's a fair question, but I think we've learned over the past year. And if you look back, we were able to pass a budget for 2025 and to pass important pieces of legislation with a very divided National Assembly. We passed a narco-traffic law, we passed a law on the fin de vie, the end of life, and many others. And this is why I believe we can find common grounds. There is, of course, really clear divisions between the left and the right, and this is going to be a surprise to no one. But what you see is that there is an increasing consciousness of the need to have a good budgetary trajectory that, abides with our European commitments, and this is something that was not the case a year ago. So you have more and more MPs realizing this, and I do believe that they're going to act responsibly. This means some of their program is not going to apply. Some of the measures that they don't like might end up being in place. But eventually, I think we can get there if there is indeed this willingness to make compromise.
Well, we heard then from Lecornu, who said that he was going to talk with opposition parties. But what exactly is his wiggle room? What are Macron's red lines?
I think he's not going to start with red lines. And I think this is going to be a huge change. Not saying I'm not going to go there, but please tell me what you want me to consider and let's build something together. And this is totally feasible. And the reason I'm really confident with Sébastien Lecornu as a person, not considering his political past or where he comes from, is because he was able in this very National Assembly to pass a very important bill, the military programming bill, that increased our military spending, which was absolutely necessary, but there was no consensus on this. And he managed, talking to everyone, being very humble, as he has been since he was appointed, to embark everyone except for La France Insoumise, but that was just a posture that they adopted. So looking at what he's done as a minister, I am rather confident that he might actually manage to not only pass a budget, but also have a plan for a country for the next month.
He certainly has a lot of experience. He's a career politician. What do you believe makes him the right choice to lead the next government?
As you said, he's a seasoned politician, but he's also someone who's really rooted. He was the mayor of a small town. He was elected in various capacities, and he's used to speaking to everyone. When you do local politics, you know that you have to speak to everyone. You have your opposition sitting at the same table. You're not just, discussing great and general ideas or ideologies. You need to find solutions for day-to-day situations. So I believe that's another asset he has. And there's also a bit of, a learning curve. Obviously, when Michel Barnier was appointed right after the snap elections a year ago, the right thought for some reason that they had won the elections because they had an MP. The left, on the contrary, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, thought that because they had arrived first, they had won the elections and that they should apply their program. And there was no way anyone would talk to each other. Right now, the situation has changed drastically. And even, after what happened at the National Assembly 2 days ago, you can see that the mindsets are evolving and that everyone is aware of the importance of finding stability for a country.
The situation has changed, but the left-wing bloc, comprised of 4 parties, still has the majority of seats in the parliament. Do you think that because of this, Lecornu will be trying to negotiate more with the socialists, or do you think also the National Rally, being a considerable bloc in parliament, he will try to negotiate with them as well?
I think there are really big differences, even conceptual and principial differences between the different parties that compose the left They were indeed a coalition for the election. It was an electoral coalition. But when you listen to the speeches of Jean-Luc Mélenchon and La France Insoumise today, and those of the Socialist Party, even with regards to today's movement, the Bloc Ontou movement, and to many other things, Europe, our position internationally, and you name it, there are so many differences that I don't think you should consider them as a bloc. I do believe that there are discussions that need to take place with the left parties, with the ecologists, with the socialists, even with the communists, because they've shown that they're willing to discuss, and obviously they'll have different solutions at the right. But apart from La France Insoumise and the National Rally, I see MPs that are really willing to cooperate.
And where do you think the concessions will come from? Because the budget is a big issue for many, but it's not the only one.
Absolutely. The thing with the budget is that it crystallizes the opposition. It's the one time everyone goes out and makes their own show. They say, this is absolutely outrageous. I cannot accept this because I'm from the left or for the right. But ultimately, after weeks of discussions, in particular discussions on the confidence vote that took place 2 days ago, you see that there's an agreement on the trajectory. There's an agreement on the fact that we need to be careful with our budget. And yes, you can find public cuts without it being too hard on the socialists. And yes, you can perhaps impose some taxes limited to a very specific category without being, in disagreement with the right. I, for instance, I'm totally against any new taxes. I believe in France we already pay too many, but I'm totally willing to have discussions if we can find reasonable grounds.
And do you think, last question, that this kind of political paralysis, if we can call it that, I know that there have been concessions made and laws have been passed, but do you think that this, rolling door of new prime ministers and governments will give the far right any kind of boost in the 2027 presidential elections?
That's a risk, and when you look at the polls, they are indeed very high, but you see that they're still around 30%, and they're still collecting anger, and they're still benefiting from a climate of insecurity and instability. I believe that if we're able to find a way of a coalition, the way of an agreement, you name it, maybe a non-censor agreement, this will perhaps lower the impact of the national rally. And the other thing is, when they actually act, when they make proposals, French people do see what their identity is, what it still is. We saw it during the elections with some of their candidates that were completely anti-racist. I'm just going to say it boldly because that's what it was. So I think there's also, in fact, a perception of what they bring to the national debate that will stay. And so I'm also optimistic in that sense, if I can.
All right, Éléonore Caroit, MP from the Renaissance Party, thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.